There's a version of leadership that looks strong on the surface: clear systems, tight routines, and outcomes that hold. But underneath, it's fragile.
Because when pressure increases, inspection, safeguarding, staffing, you find out quickly whether leadership is actually holding the school or just managing it.
And here's the uncomfortable truth: leaders don't lose clarity overnight. There's a drift, small compromises, decisions that feel safer rather than right. So today is about leadership that holds, leadership that shapes, and what that actually looks like when the pressure is real. Welcome back to Being the Head, the human cost of leading schools. I'm Jane.
And I'm Jacqui.
And today we're joined by head teacher Dan Cowling, and we're exploring what it really means to lead in a way that shapes a school, culture, systems, people, and outcomes.
Dan, welcome to Being the Head.
Hello to you both, and thank you very much for having me today.
Before we go into our questions, let's actually look at what the statistics are telling us. I was recently in a leadership briefing when heads described their inspection experiences, and two words kept coming up: not together, but separately: fair and brutal.
And that gap matters. Frameworks might aim for consistency, but lived experiences tell a different story.
The DFE Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders 2024 shows over 75% of leaders feel accountability pressure is shaping their decisions. And I imagine as that was 2 years ago, percentage has increased. So this isn't neutral.
And the Teacher Wellbeing Index 2025 highlights that 78% of leaders report high stress levels.
So when we talk about leadership, we're talking about leadership under pressure. And here's the bit we don't always say out loud. Some leaders are making decisions they know aren't quite right because they're trying to stay safe.
Dan, welcome to Being the Head. It's great to have you here. I've just got one question to start off with, and it's a biggie. What does leadership feel right now for you?
Leadership right now feels like holding a steady center while everything around us is moving really quickly. There's this constant pull between the long-term work, the strategic work that really matters and is important for the long-term direction of the school. And then there's these immediate pressures that seem to arrive daily: safeguarding issues, staffing concerns, staffing issues, parental concerns and complaints. Don't get me started on complaints, and accountability. I feel really energized by the people I lead, but I'm also very aware that staying effective requires deliberate choices about where I put my time and my attention.
So, Dan, sort of going back to that, you listed a whole sort of number of things that sort of are swirling around that sort of centre that you're holding. Where do you feel that tension the most between doing what's right and what feels safe?
I think the tension shows up most in the curriculum and staffing decisions that you have to make almost on a daily basis. It seems that the safest option is always the quickest fix, using more data, doing more monitoring, more control, trying to get a handle yourself of what's going on. But the right thing is often the slower process, that, investing in the teacher development, trusting professional judgment, and accepting that improvement is sometimes messy under pressure. That's hard to do. It's hard to hold on to. But holding on to that strategic direction and focusing on the long-term gains, that's where the real improvements in schools come from.
And I know we had a conversation, I think just before Easter. Do you think those tensions and pressures change as you're coming towards the end of a term?
Absolutely. The complaints seem to come in, don't they, the last week of term, and the staffing issues seem to rear their head towards the end of term. When staff are tired, that's when things slip a little bit, isn't it? Or when people are off sick and you're trying to cover lessons at the last minute and trying to find staff. And everyone's just a little bit more edgy towards the end of term because they're tired, aren't they? And that just makes it more difficult and more challenging. And I remember you speaking on one of the podcasts recently about how in education we're always gearing up towards the end of term because we need that short-term rest over the holidays. And it almost feels like we're racing to get to that point so that we can just take a breather.
Yeah,
I'm really
absolutely.
interested, Dan, in how it gets pushed out, that strategic direction. Do you feel that you spend enough time on that strategic direction, and how do you prioritize it?
I've got much better at it in the time that I've been the head because I've begun to realize how important it is. We have spent most of, as my leadership team, we spent most of this year preparing our next 3-year school development plan because that's something I've put at the forefront of the team at SLT meetings week after week so that we are discussing it and we are planning ahead. But this is the first time that I've done that in 6 years ahead when I've really started thinking about what next. And that is the most important thing in schools is being prepared for what next, because otherwise it's all on your plate and all of the time. One of the key things I find that I'm much better at now is carving out the time in my day where I can just sit down and focus on the longer term issues, whether that's just closing my door for an hour or even sitting down in the evening for an hour in front of my own laptop at home with just a bit of space in the office where I just think, right, now is the time. I'm just going to try and get my head around this bit so it can feed into the longer term plan.
So you're ring fencing that time in effect, aren't you? You're saying, right, this is really important. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to have some sort of strategic direction now. And do you find that makes you as a leader almost more calm than you do that? Does it make you have a bit more of a direction in the school?
I don't know if my team would agree with that, but I think that, yes, I think it does. I think what I've also got better at is seeking others' opinions or, sorry, let's say opinions, others' viewpoints. When we're planning for strategic planning, talking to other members of my team to get their input. Particularly if you're thinking about the long-term plan and you're thinking about the curriculum area, go and talk to the people who are on the ground and working on that. Take their input. Deciding their direction for them isn't necessarily the best way. They need to have a real stake in that direction. And sometimes those conversations are that ring fence time and they're enjoyable for both parties because it's talking about things of where you can move the school forward. And particularly when it's a curriculum things, it's things that we still all enjoy as teachers at heart, don't we?
Dan, you run a secondary school, don't you? Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have many leaders, I should think, in different departments across the school. I mean, Jane and I are both primary based, so this is a little bit a different scenario for us. So, what do you do when you notice that tension in your leaders across your school? How does that alter your leadership?
You have to be mindful of how people are feeling about things and making sure that sometimes it is just being that counselor, isn't it? It's listening to their concerns because, one of the things we know is as when you're running a school, you can't solve everyone's problems for them, but you can listen to their problems. And I think where the coaching element comes in is beginning to talk people through about, so what is it that's worrying you? Why is it worrying you? What do you want to do about it? And having that coaching conversation to support them through that. Because, I mean, Jane and I've had discussion recently where we talked about something that those things that feel immediate and feel a problem there and then, actually often in 2 or 3 days' time things happen in that time and it can go a completely different direction and perhaps not be the stress that you were thinking it was going to be.
Yeah, and overthinking things. I was with a head recently, and she was talking about actually the coaching element and reflective supervision in her has made an absolute fantastic difference to her leadership because what her mind was doing, and this was over a complaint, is she'd almost changed this person into this mythical creature that was coming at her from left, right, and centre. In her brain had done that. And actually, when she was able to take that time and take that reflection time and take that time away, she was able to see it as actually, that's not what it is. That's me that has created this rather than the actual situation. So I think for me, it was something that I really advocated, the coaching element of it. And it seems to me, Dan, that what you're saying is that's a big part of your leadership now as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of listening to people and then give them the opportunity to talk things through, particularly when we're talking about the longer term strategic planning. Those things that can feel immediate right now can be resolved if we've got a clear plan of how we're going to make sure we work through that now and in the future.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Dan, we're going to get to the nitty gritty now, and it's really the core of each of us as leaders. What's your, we want to look at the moral purpose, not as a concept, but in practice. So what anchors your decisions when the pressure is high?
I think it comes back to is what we're doing now going to improve the learning and the well-being of the pupils over time? Is this going to be good for them? And is it going to make sure that they get the outcomes that they need and the enjoyment out of school that they deserve? If it doesn't strengthen teaching, if it doesn't protect our vulnerable pupils or sustain our staffing, then it doesn't get priority. And that's the clarity that I try and use to keep me grounded when everything around you can feel urgent at times, can't it? So my school's located in West London. It is in a nice leafy part of West London, but the children we serve come from many deprived areas across the borough that we work in. We've got about 45% pupil premium children at the school, and we've got about 40% of children that speak English as a second language. So when I started at the school, which was in April 2020, which was the worst time you could probably ever start as a head teacher, when there were no children in school, the school had been 3 times requires improvement, had a financial, what I call now the historic debt of £3.6 million, which was probably at the time one of the top 5 highest debts of any school in the country. Yeah, the results really weren't where we wanted them to be. And I probably never walked into a school that I thought was more dangerous in my life. We had a bit of a challenge at the early days, I can tell you that much. What I think I've realised is a journey's not quick. And some of the things that we've done, I'm really proud of. We've got a good Ofsted judgment at the moment, and we're expecting Ofsted to come again soon. We've paid about £1 million of the debt off, but mainly through sale of assets that the school had and from clever one-off things that we've had along the way. And we're beginning to see a turning point in the outcomes, which has taken longer than perhaps I would have anticipated. But this is only really the first year that we've got a stable staffing in the school. In the time that I've been there, for the last 3 or 4 years, we were looking at 20 teachers leaving every year, and we were scrabbling around to fill places. But now that we've got a consistent and reliable staffing base, it feels that we've got the opportunity now to push for the things that really matter in terms of really seeing the outcomes that the children deserve. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that vision
Because
changes.
how do you ensure that you don't drift off that clear purpose in order to keep that staff? How do you think you maintain that in your leadership?
I think one of the things we've been really clear about is making sure that the school is a nice place for staff to work, firstly. So there's lots of talk about well-being that we hear in education, but I think that one of the most important things is that teachers enjoy coming to work. And that doesn't mean that teachers enjoy coming to work necessarily because the kids are passive and everything's rosy. I think teachers enjoy coming to work when they're supported by a strong leadership team, when the building is happy and the pupils walking around are polite, the interactions that you have with children. We've had a visitor this week, and her comment was, "Your children here have got real character. Ours seem very passive." And the staff who work at our school really like the fact that children have character. That's one of the reasons they stay and they work there. And I think we've also been really clear that the school is on a journey, and people want to be on that journey. They want to be part of that journey. And the successes we've had along the way, we've celebrated jointly with everybody because they've been so important for milestones for the school. And I think for us particularly, the school has no history. It's been open in this building for 10 years. And although it was previously a different school before that, it has none of it. We're creating the history for the school. And I keep reminding the staff that your time here is you are creating the legacy for this school and for these children and for the future. And that seems to be an important driver about making that sense of belonging that's really good with the staff. And that hopefully is what's keeping them and wanting them to be part of the journey. And at the moment, touch wood, I've got 4 vacancies for September, and I'm hoping it only stays at 4.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
And hopefully I'll fill them all.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. I'd like to touch on what you've just said there, Dan. You talked about strong leadership in that section. What does strong leadership, do you think, looks like? If I'm a staff member, a leader of geography department, what would they see in your leadership? They would go, yeah, that's strong leadership, do you think?
I'd hope that they see that it's decisive in terms of the strength of the leadership. is there's been some very difficult decisions we've had to make along the way as a school. But what I've always tried to do is I've always felt it's really important to share that decision with the staff. And that goes back to, start with why, doesn't it? And make sure that we've always been clear about the why. So when we make decisions, that we share the why with the staff and more widely if we've had to, so that the purpose and the reason for the decision that's being made. And that's the strength of the leadership, isn't it? That you're making decisions that are reasoned and that you understand why you're making those decisions. And I think we all know that sometimes those decisions aren't always to turn out to go as well, perhaps, as we'd like them to be. But you have to go back to, well, why did I make that decision? What was the reason for doing so? Where was the evidence base for that? And making sure that's been shared widely enough so that staff understand and feel part of the decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So would you say that you are visible? I mean, because strong leadership, I think, for secondary school, is it the same for primary school, Jane? Do you think we have different ideas of strong leadership as well?
I
I
don't
don't know.
think it is. I don't know, because I sometimes I'm acutely aware that I'm not visible visiting classrooms, but I'm also acutely aware that when I walk into a classroom, the dynamic changes in that classroom. And the children behave differently because I am in the room, because I'm the head teacher. It's not because of me personally. But what I do try and do is, so for example, every Friday is my duty day. So I make sure that I'm out on almost every duty on a Friday. I make sure that I'm on the gate every morning welcoming the children in with my associate head, so that I'm visible with the children, and that I'm very happy to get stuck in the dinner queue often, most days of the week if I need to, and we'll talk to the children at that point in the day and often ask them how their day is going. And what never ceases to amaze me is how many children come up to me and ask me how my day is going these days, now that I've been doing it for so long. And I think those things are the really nice part of the job, but the visibility I feel is with the children rather than perhaps necessarily with the staff, because I also don't want the staff to feel that I'm walking in their classroom checking up on them, because that's not what I'm doing. I'm walking around because I want to get the climate of the school when I do. But because obviously at secondary level we have a wider leadership team, there is every period of every day, there is a senior member of staff who is walking around in classrooms every single day of the week, every period. So we do have that visibility as a team. And in the nature of my role, when you're dealing with the massive financial debt that we have, and the strategic issues, and the relationships with the local authority, with other local schools, huge parts of my week are taken up on meetings that most of my staff have no idea that I'm involved in. And it's just not as easy to be as visible, perhaps, as I'd like to be at times.
When you think about leadership, I mean, the one thing that used to really bug me was the fact that I couldn't be as visible because nobody really understands what the role entails until you're actually doing it, do they?
No, and that's why I really try and make that time. The best time is for me, if I'm really stuck in a piece of work and I've really had enough of it and it's driving me crackers, just go out on duty at break time with the children. In particular, on a lovely day like we've got today, the children will be out playing football. It's fantastic. You can go out on the field, you can go and talk to them. And sometimes you can get your steps in as well while you're doing it. And that, I think, is one of the beauties of the job, is that if you really feel the necessity, you can just go and talk to people and walk around. And that is part of the leadership role, isn't it? And I think I'm listening to Team Habits at the moment as an audiobook. I tend to try and listen to audiobooks on the way into work in the morning. I tend to try and put the radio on the way home. And he talks about in that about how good leaders go around and know their team, that they talk to members of staff that they work with, ask them how their family are, ask them about their hobbies and their pastimes, because it's those relationships that build the belonging in an institution and how important they are. So I do try and make sure that I do that as best I can, and particularly the banter with the staff or the children about football is always a good one, isn't it?
Culture. And I think sometimes when heads go into a school, particularly challenging schools like the ones you walked into, they're trying to fix the outcomes before the culture is secure. And that doesn't hold. You've talked a bit about sort of that strong culture, but if I was to ask a member of staff, one of your members of staff, what would they describe the culture on a day-to-day basis, do you think?
For me, the culture in our school now really shows up in the now calm classrooms. And it wasn't always like that. I mean, even 3 years ago, it wasn't like that, but we have calm classrooms. I could take either of you happily around my school at any point of the day. We could walk around and you would see every classroom, children settled and working and learning. We've really established consistent routines across the school. It's really important. Not only routines for behaviour, but routines for how classrooms operate, how children behave. So behave's not quite the word. How children operate in classrooms in terms of what's expected of them, and staff who talk about learning rather than the children complying with behaviour models now, that's really important for us. I mean, you'll see teachers in our staff work area talking about lessons, about sharing good practice with each other. You'll see my leadership team visiting around the lessons and going around the school. And I think there's a real sense of collective responsibility that's built up in our culture that's it's taken a long time for us to do. It's evident when you walk around our school now and you talk to the staff and to the children, I think you'll find.
Where do leaders get this wrong? And what do you think is the first thing that slips when that culture weakens?
Well, interestingly, when I was thinking about culture, I was thinking, I think what people do is they make this mistake that being busy and doing lots of things is culture. In other words, more meetings, more initiatives, more policies, more ideas, more work, basically, and mistaking that for being some sort of positive culture in education. And I just don't think that's the case. I think the culture is more about the daily rhythm you have at school, the routines, the shared planning that people do, the conversations that they have, the sense of belonging, for me is much, much more important than, some schools that you will visit will feel very, very busy, that everyone's always being given more. And you can sometimes see that in the eyes of the staff as you walk around, can't you? With the workload almost visible on their faces. And I'm not saying my staff don't work hard, because I know absolutely they do, but we've been really, really clear about creating a culture where it staff make their own decisions about when they need to do that work. I'm well aware that many of my staff have got young families. If they need to leave early in the afternoon, that's fine by me. I don't mind when they choose to do their work or how it's done, as long as their lessons are planned and the children get good teaching and marking and feedback. The staff can work that out for themselves. That's part of that almost that sense of trust that we've built in our staff.
So, Dan, once you've got your culture secure, everything then comes back to teaching. And yet the first thing to slip under pressure is usually that quality of education, isn't it? And the EEF toolkit is really clear on this, that high quality teaching has the biggest impact. So how do you, as a leader, proactively ring fence or protect the quality of education and the teaching and learning?
I think what I'd say is our really comprehensive professional development calendar that we have as a school. We really proactively ring fence professional learning time, and we've really been working this year on supporting the coaching and observation cycle that we've had in school. About it's non-judgmental. It is about coaching teachers to be better teachers. Our professional development calendar includes all of the meetings and events that we have across the year for staff, so they know what things are essential for them, where they have to be, and they know which things are optional. We have training sessions for teachers, optional ones throughout the week that they can dip into if they wish to do so. And it's really about making sure that we focus, that the staff can have that professional learning time to make sure that the quality of teaching is at the forefront of what they do. And we've stripped out the non-essential aspects of what can happen in a school week to really focus that the rhythm of the week is really clear, that staff know on this day this is what's happening, but on these days I've got this time free so that I can actually focus on my planning, on my lessons, and that we provide subsequent amounts of departmental time to allow staff to have those discussions. Because one of the things I think, particularly in secondary education, that I've noticed more recently is we spent a lot of time talking about pedagogy, and about teaching per se, but at a secondary level, that subject specific pedagogy still seems to be a gap I think we have in education. Teachers are, at secondary level, I'm a teacher of geography, but how much time do I actually spend thinking about, well, what's the geography, the knowledge I need here, the ways in which I specifically teach components here, or in science or in English, how do we specifically teach these aspects of it that can often be quite challenging? And yet we take that for more a whole school approach or a generic approach to pedagogy. And I've really tried to encourage that our staff have really begun to think much more clearly about what's the subject-specific pedagogy they need so the children get the very best lessons in that subject whilst they're attending our school.
That's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Because I've never considered it from that angle. I mean, probably because I'm primary based and not secondary based, is actually how did you deliver a very high quality geography lesson compared with how you're delivering, say, a home tech lesson?
Yeah, we're really going back to thinking about, well, what is it to be, what can pupils demonstrate to be good geographers, or what can they demonstrate to be good historians? Because there are differences between those subjects, and it's that subject specific pedagogy that I think it's easy to put a whole school CPD session together where you focus on particular areas of pedagogy. Many schools are using whiteboards, for example, aren't they? As you know, that's a really clear pedagogy you can use across all subjects that you can use. But what about if you need to specifically talk about, or teach children about coastal erosion, or you need to teach children specifically about adverbs in a foreign language? That they're very different things, aren't they? And there are subject-specific pedagogy that underpins that I think we really need to do more work on in education rather than the wider pedagogy. And that's what we're really trying to focus on with our staff at the moment.
I think that needs to feed down into the primary curriculum. And I know it's something that schools were beginning to look at a few years ago, is actually teaching the children in primary schools. As a historian, you need to approach it in this way. But I think, as a primary trained teacher, it's a very generic approach. And I think that's where I think potentially we need to use the skill set of our secondary school colleagues to help us design those sort of primary curriculums. Because it's really important. If those foundations and those skills aren't put in place at an early age, you're having to reteach all over again when, they leave primary and come up to secondary school or, middle to high school, whatever it is, you're having, or first to middle school, you're having to reteach. And that's really difficult, both for teachers, but for the pupils as well.
That works both ways, because I think there is, particularly what we're noticing is the huge literacy gaps that children are having coming into secondary, and the skills at primary of primary teachers, particularly in tackling that and supporting us with phonics teaching, and that aspect is something we're actively pursuing in terms of working with our primary partners about how they can support us with those low levels of literacy we're finding in children, particularly as they're coming in at year 7 and 8, the
Yeah.
post-pandemic.
Yeah, I did. There was a bit of work in the trust that I worked in um, before I left, where our literacy leads were working with our secondary counterparts about implementing an appropriate phonics program into high schools to sort of narrow that gap, because they just didn't. It wasn't there. It wasn't that skill set.
And it's those low levels of literacy that we are seeing in children, particularly in year 7 and 8, where they are really struggling to access the curriculum. And then that shows up in poor behaviour around the school.
That's it, because they feel disengaged, they feel stupid. It's all of those things because they can't access it. They can't read. They can't
They can't access it. Absolutely.
access it at all. No.
I'm really interested, Dan. I always say that. I always start off with I'm really interested, but I am really genuinely interested in other leaders in other sectors. But you must have had some horrendous challenges turning around a school. I mean, Jane and I have both done this, where you've gone into this and thought, oh, my love. Now, the Catholics would say God only sends you places where you can cope. But I used to think, oh, do you know what? Another one? How many more does he want me to do? Anyway, so I'm just really interested in that. You've had that real challenge of your budget. And there was that research that came out, I think about 5 years ago, where they said, let's seat what academies are focusing on most on. And it was all about finance. And it was nothing about education and the children and pedagogy or nothing like that. It was all about finance. I'm really interested about how you attacked that challenge, how you went about. Where did you start? Because your school was really low graded, wasn't it? And your finance was shot, and you've got a new build. Is that correct? You've got a new build, or
Yeah.
just talk us through
The
that.
school. Yeah. So the school was rebuilt in 2017, and it had previously been a boys' school, and it moved from the old school on the same piece of land. The old school was knocked down, and the new building was built by the DFE, and the school transferred, and the debt, which was about 3 million at that point or so, transferred with the school. It wasn't closed. So the school is still it's a foundation school, but it's still local authority maintained. And so the every year the school has to apply for a license deficit from the local authority. When I first started, I think there were a couple of things that were COVID brought a sense of, because the school had been in such a bad situation, many of the staff were supply staff at the time that I joined, and lessons were online, and it was God help the world, wasn't it, at that point, if you remember back? I mean, it really
Yeah.
felt absolutely. And so we sort of had a bit of a God that the finances at that point, we've saved quite a bit of money for that first sort of term, that summer term of April 2020, that because some of those supply teachers, well, I wasn't going to pay them to sit and do online lessons that I knew they weren't doing. We used the staff that we had, and we sorted out the online lessons from the staff that we had that we're actually paying. So there was a bit of saving there. We also managed to sell the caretaker's house, which brought about £500,000 in. And in those first few years, because the staffing at the school was so low and the role was relatively low and it was increasing, the income was increasing every year, but the staffing didn't need to keep pace with the increase of the funding. It wasn't until about year 3, 4, where we really needed to get the staffing up to full level. And of course, when you've employed NQTs and they've been employed for 4 years, ECT, suddenly we're talking about the increase in pay, aren't we? And then that also culminated at the same time as huge rise in inflation, huge rise in interest rates, the national insurance increase that we saw massively. All of those things have now hit, and the school's funding hasn't kept pace with those. And for us as a school, we're paying about £120,000 interest a year back to the local authority for the size of the loan. And that's immediately 120,000 that we don't have to spend on children, isn't it? I mean, we've all seen the increases in energy costs, and we've just been through a round of looking at all our contracts on the register. I mean, even our grounds maintenance has risen by about 4 or 5,000 a year. And that it's just, all of these things are encroaching upon what isn't a very particularly growing income stream. So that's been very, very challenging. I've been a thorn in everyone's side along the way. And my view is we got the debt. The debt is down to £2.5 million. At this point, there is no more one-offs to repay anything. There's no more government grants coming through. It's ultimately, I genuinely feel it's responsible of somebody in a much higher pay grade than me to actually take a look at it and to say, what is the future here for the debt? And we're one of about 12 schools that have got debts of over £1 million nationally. They're nearly all maintained, apart from 3 which have now academised and 2 which are now closed or closing. So we'll probably be in the top 5 by come the end of this year, next year. And the total debt of all those schools across the country is about £38 million just for those top 12 schools. So either something needs to be done, or it's just going to sit there forever, and the school is going to constantly, continually pay £120,000 a year of interest, which is not fair on the children that attend the school. Not when 40% of them are people. I mean, half our pupil premium money is paying in interest. That's how you could look at it, of our income. So yes, I am being, and I still continue to be a thorn in everybody's side about it, because I just think it's morally wrong. But I've come to peace with that. It doesn't keep me awake at night anymore when it did in the early years.
Hmm.
And ultimately, I can always do a David Cameron if it comes to it, can't I?
I wonder how many other heads are like that, because I remember sitting there worrying about finance. It was the biggest worry for me with my little schools was finance, but with no
Hey,
obvious
when you've got a debt of
answer.
£2.5 million, what's a couple of, what's a
Yeah.
100,000 here and there? Do you know? I mean, you know, and I think it's because from my perspective, the size of the debt is so big. It is never going to be recoverable by the school. The school is never
Yeah.
going to be able to repay £2.5 million. If the school paid 100,000 a year, that's 25 years. That's if on top of the interest. So the school would have to effectively look for £220,000 a year deducted from its income every year for 25 years to repay it.
It must have been underfunded.
I think the issue with the school was when it was the previous school, its role fell so low over so many years that it became unmanageable financially. What I feel should have happened is when the school became the new school, they should have closed it and reopened as a new school and been dealt with the debt then, but it
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
And I took on the job, and people have reminded me that, oh, well, you took the job on, you knew what you were letting. Well, I did, absolutely. And I feel that, I've done And I will continue to do everything I can to tackle that, because I think I just think it's morally wrong. I mean, it feels to me that children now are paying for the benefits that children 20, 25 years had because of that being allowed to increase. And that doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel particularly right in the wider context of the support that the government is giving to local authorities over send deficits, for example. The government's accepted there's a problem there. But if you look at the list of all the schools with debts across the country and you start doing the sums, which I have done because I've made sure that I've done, you're talking, 38 million just for the top 12 schools. There is a significant issue there that needs to be addressed, I feel.
That is way above what we can possibly access.
And yeah, and I even had our local MP, who was a prime minister in the past, came and sat in my office, and that was interesting discussion about the debt.
Yeah. Did that help?
Not in the slightest.
You're right. Morally, the children that are paying the price of other people's mistakes and lack of making those challenging decisions years ago, and you took it on. It wasn't a debt that you created. It was a debt that was a legacy debt that you took on. You've done the best you can, but I have no idea how they expect you to actually complete that, because it's never going to go away. And the children are the ones that are paying the price.
That's what I feel too.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Let's moving on to that sort of leadership and that constant decision making, particularly under pressure. And there's so many different pressures at the moment. You've got the white paper, you've got the budgets, you've got safeguarding, you've got parental complaints. There's pressures, and you've got Ofsted. Let's not forget about that wonderful framework that people are struggling through. And research shows that fatigue reduces that judgment and that quality over time, and the compression of roles. So how do your systems support your decision making? What have you put in your schools? And I know I've had a conversation with you off air about the different systems that you've got in place, but for you alone, what system do you have to be able to sort of combat that fatigue decision? And what have you put in place for your staff who are dealing with those high stakes decision making sort of issues that are coming through?
I've always been a firm believer in systems, and I think systems can help you with many of these things. So we try and make sure that the systems that we have in school are relatively simple, but also transparent about why we have them. So things like our data dashboards focus on what are the trends and not the noise going on as there. Actually, just pick out the key trends here. We always try and make sure that what's the impact of what we're doing going to have for pupils? What's the pupil impact going to be? And where possible, delegate the decision so that the right person is making the decision. The person or the people that it's going to impact the most have a say in the decision that's being made. And sometimes that works out really well, and sometimes it needs support, doesn't it? Sometimes people make decisions and you have to support them through that choice that they've made and make sure that it works in the best way that it can be possible. I think what I've been really keen to do is trust people. Firstly, that you say to people, I trust you with making the decision that you're going to make. I trust you with leading this area. If you need help and you want support and you want guidance, I'm happy here to give that to you. And if it goes wrong, we'll pick up the pieces and we'll get it sorted. There's no decision you make in a school that's not going to be undoable, or that you can't. Even along the way, there's been plenty of decisions that I've made that I've had to change along the way or change course with, and they're all recoverable, aren't they? All these decisions are recoverable. That when very rarely in education are we making life or death decisions. We're making decisions about the futures of children, which are really, really important. But we can change them as we're going through them, and when more evidence comes to light, can't we?
Yeah, and I think what I was thinking more about is sort of you've got your systems like your data dashboards and things, but around the well-being of your staff. So I know we had a conversation about place to be, and that's sort of what you've put
Yep.
in place, the supervision. And I know that you're a coach as well. So I know that through that you get your own coaching. So what have you actually set up to support, those staff that are having to make those difficult decisions around, but sort of to help them with that emotional and cognitive overload, really, I suppose, is what I was.
I think we always, as I said earlier, we always go back to start with why. So why do you want to do this? What's the purpose of it? and what do you think the impact is going to be? And that can be through coaching conversations that we have. I'm lucky that a number of my senior team, I've either got coaching qualifications or are working towards them. So those discussions and those situations happen. And I think it's about, we talk about an open door policy, and that doesn't mean that your door has to be open 24/7. But what I think, in my school, what we mean by an open door policy is that if you need to talk this through, come and talk to one of us. There's more than one person you can talk this through, and we can find solutions always. Let's keep it on the solutions. Often people have come into me with a whole bag of problems, and I just say, look, I'm not interested in the problems, because we can talk about these till the end of the day, till the cows come home. Right now, we've got to put a solution in place. What is the most obvious solution that is going to fix this right now and put things back on track? And trying to keep it solution focused is really a key part of it. And we really do try, we try very hard to avoid blame completely, because things do go wrong, and sometimes people are accountable, yes, but that's not the immediate thing that needs, dealing with. What needs dealing with at that time, at that moment of crisis, is level heads about where do we go forward, what's the answer, how do we support people to get through this. And I'd hope staff in the school always go away feeling, even if they've had a bad day, and that we've been able to put systems in place to make sure that it's fixed, and that it can be moving forward, and we don't hold on to things, you know and have this blame thing that I've seen in some institutions, whereby you know okay, I've upset the head. That head's not going to speak to me for a week. I've never wanted to be like that, and I hope the staff always feel they can come and talk to me when things have gone wrong, and that there is no judgment.
Probably
So,
because you've had that yourself.
yeah.
You
Yes,
learn
yeah,
from
been there,
really
done that.
bad.
Knowing,
Yeah,
yeah,
I learned so much more from poor leadership than I did from really great leadership, and I had both. So if you've experienced it, you're tending to have a real lived experience, so you don't do it yourself, do you?
absolutely. Because how does it help anybody if you're not going to talk to them for a week? For goodness sake, you know what they need: your support, your guidance, and to know that it's going to be okay. And even if it's not going to be okay, to be reassured that it will be okay eventually.
Now we've come to the end of our questions, Dan, but there is one I'd like to finish off on, and that is there a question that you've been burning for us to ask you we haven't given you that opportunity to talk about?
Was um actually, there is one thing you were going to ask about decisions you've taken off your plate, which I think is an interesting one. One of the things that I had some very early advice from my head coach when I first started as head teacher was, when I first started and the school was an absolute mess, it was literally, although it wasn't formal complaints, it was certainly moans, concerns by members of the public about how awful the children were out on the streets and how awful the school was. And it felt like it was almost every day. And I felt to the point of, you've been doing the job for 6 months and you just feel it's highly critical of your school, don't you? All these barrage of, and he just said to me is, pass your complaints or your concerns to your deputy head. You don't need to know all of them. You only need to know the serious ones that need your eye on them. Let them have a feel about how you're seeing. They don't have the vested interest in the school in the same way that you do. And what I mean by that is, there's two things. One is protect the organisation at all costs. I think that's one of the key jobs of any leader. And many heads don't understand that, in that your job as the face of the organization is that whatever happens, the organization comes first. You have to protect its reputation. You have to protect those that come to the school, both the staff and the pupils, from all the other noise out there. Staff do not want you to stand up in staff briefing and list out all the complaints you've had from members of the public about the school. They don't need to know that. The children, actually, they don't behave perfectly in society. And one thing I always pick up on is, children drop a lot of rubbish in schools, don't they? Haven't you heard that narrative before? Have you been out and driven on the roads and seen the verges on the roads? Do you know how much rubbish adults drop? It's no wonder children drop rubbish, is it? Because adults in society drop rubbish worse. In fact, schools are relatively clean places. And I'd always hold up the our school that actually you walk around, there's not much rubbish. But that's not true of the streets locally or the verges of the road. And so going back to the complaints part, is that once you give that to your deputy to filter for you, particularly between concerns and complaints, and our policy is very clear about a concern being a moan and a complaint being a formal complaint under the complaints policy. Once your deputy is dealing with the concerns, the school feels a much nicer place because you're not hearing that constant moaning about your school. And one, we have been very, very good. We always respond to every concern. My deputy does it in writing every single time, but we only respond when you give your name and address and you can be clear about who you are, because a number of unfiltered emails you might get through. And I suppose the last part of that is, just because somebody says something, it doesn't make it true. Just because somebody says your children were having a fight at the bus stop, it doesn't make it true, because often what it turns out is the children who weren't attending your school that might have been having a fight at the bus stop. They weren't wearing your school uniform. So I think having that lens of certainly 5 or 6 years as a head teacher, firstly having a filter, and secondly being able to accept that just because somebody says something, it doesn't make it true, is a much clearer way about them being able to hold your head more highly, and then start looking for all the positives in the school. And the other thing we're really, really good at is the weekly shout outs we have in staff briefing for all the positive things that come in about the school and the staff and the children, to make sure we make that be the common theme or the common ground that we have in school. So I hope that gives you a Stephen Bartlett moment for you.
Well, I mean, it does, and it goes back to, actually, we're adults, really. We're children in adults' bodies, aren't we? So actually, if you think about
Absolutely.
it, what you do for children, you focus on the positive. You don't focus on the negative, because you don't get anything from the negative. You'll get something from the positive. Why don't we put that through for adults? The world would be a better place if we had that sort of outlook on life. Is actually, we need the stickers. We need the stickers. We need that positive reassurance, don't we, in life?
Absolutely. And also, when the children are out and about in the community, they are children. And if every adult you ever speak to says about what did you get up to as a child, they don't tell you the good things they did they? They tell you all the naughty things they did. And children
Yeah.
are children. I'm not advocating children go out and cause chaos in the community at all. But what I'm saying is they are children, and our job is to support them as adults to behave properly and to behave appropriately and to set really good examples. And unfortunately, as you were saying about adults, we're not always very good at that, are we?
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so Dan, we've got coming over to our If I Only Knew section. So if you could go back to the start of your headship, what do you know now that you wish you knew then, and what would you have changed?
Feel I should say something about the quality of being, decision making, headship or leadership. But if I'd known then that the debt would still be £2.5 million now, I don't know if I'd taken the role on. I think one of the things that going back to what we were just talking about, I do think some of it is that nearly everything isn't life or death. And I say that nearly everything because sometimes there are some things you have to deal with in working in a school that are particularly difficult and challenging at the time. But nearly all of the day-to-day decisions that you make, all of the work that you do, it isn't a life or death decision that you are making. What you are doing is trying to do the best for your school, and therefore don't lose the sleep over things that you don't need to lose sleep over, because ultimately all of it is savable, fixable, or mendable, or there's a way through it all. Just at the time when you first start as a head, you genuinely feel that some of those decisions that you're making or the things that you've done that are wrong are going to haunt you for the rest of your life. And that just isn't the case, because all of it is, heads are good people trying to make good decisions for good reasons. And nearly everybody understands that. And sometimes it's challenging and sometimes it's difficult. And sometimes at the time, it feels like you can't see a way through it. But even if you can't reduce your debt by another £1 million, there are still plenty of other positives that you can do. And things can still be more positive if you keep putting a positive energy into them.
Thank you, Dan.
Before we leave, Dan, is there one practical takeaway for leaders listening? Something they can act on this week that you'd like to share with us?
Something I've really focused on is no meetings on a Friday. I have learned over 6 years in headship, never have a meeting on a Friday. Actually, listening to Toto Wolff on the High Performance podcast, he never has meetings before 10 o'clock because he always says that you need to get started on the day before you actually meet with people. You need to be clear about where your day is going. But I'd advocate that actually, for me, it's no meetings on a Friday. And that has come from, there are a couple of times in my career where people met with me on a Friday and delivered some pretty horrible news about something or made me sweat about something all weekend. And I just thought that was so mean and unfair of them that I now have learned, because even when you have a meeting on a Friday that can intentionally be positive, it doesn't mean something can't go wrong in that meeting. And I never want any of my staff to go home on a Friday and spend the weekend worrying about work, because I did that too many times in my career. So I've learned Fridays is duty day, go out, see the children, get round the school, visit lessons, but don't have a meeting on a Friday.
Yeah. A poet
And also
day.
means you can get out at a decent time.
Yeah. Push off early. Tomorrow's Saturday. Poet day, I used to call
Absolutely.
it. Off early. Yeah, definitely. That's a brilliant piece of advice. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you very much for joining us as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear your journey, learn about your school, and learn about the different things that you're doing. And you're a credit to the profession. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you
I
so
don't
much
know
for
about
joining
that.
us.
Thank you very
Come
much for
on,
having
take
me.
it. Take the love, Dan. Take the
Thank you.
love.
That's very kind of you, Jacqui. Thank you.
Okay. Where did we get to? Before we close, just take a moment and ask yourself, what are you carrying right now that is actually a structural pressure, not a personal failing?
What would shift if you stopped holding that alone? Because not everything you carry is yours to hold.
It's about being clearer. Clearer on purpose, clearer on culture, clearer on what matters. And thank you again. Thank you so much for being so honest and grounded in our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go, we've just a few quick updates before we sign off. If you prefer to watch these conversations, you can now find Being the Head on YouTube. We've also launched our Being the Head fortnightly briefing. You can download that directly from our kit page. And if you want to reach out to us with your own stories or feedback, our new email address is beingthehead@gmail.com.
So if you're listening and you recognise this in yourself, you're not alone. Follow the podcast as it helps more leaders find this work. Leadership is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. We see you, we hear you, and we'll see you next time.